Welcome to the Monday, November 2nd, 2015 Washougal City Council Workshop Meeting. Rose, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Boger.
Here.
Councilmember Wagner.
Here.
Councilmember Greenlee.
Here.
Councilmember McDaniel.
Here.
Councilmember Shoemaker. Councilmember Freeman. And Councilmember Lindsay.
Here.
I spoke with Councilmember Shoemaker earlier, and he said his wife has car trouble, and he may be a little late.
And Connie Jo let us know that she was running late today as well. So, are there any members of the public that would like to address council?
Whoops, sorry.
Okay, seeing none at this time, moving on to new business. Mitch, Community Development, Northwest Annexation Moratorium Ordinance.
Tried to jump the gun. Thank you, Your Honor and Council. On your consent agenda this evening is a agenda bill to set a public hearing for November 16th for the Northwest UGA annexation. In terms of a little bit of history, you'll recall that we had 6 separate petitions filed for annexation. They were all within our Northwest urban growth boundary. They encompass 3 different zoning designations: the R175, the R110, and Employment Center, and it encompassed approximately 150 acres in total. Looking at our map, again, we're in the Northwest urban growth area. This represents the property owners that we received the petitions on and had signatures on. At your workshop, or excuse me, at your meeting, July 28th of 14, you expanded those boundaries to include approximately 40 more acres in that, for a total of 190 acres. And that is the boundary that we sent off to first certification with our county assessor's office. We had 62.85% of the signatures within that area. So we received that certificate of sufficiency from the county assessor's office on August 24th. As I mentioned in the agenda bill, the annexation, the draft ordinance looks at an effective date 63 days out from the 16th. That is to provide notice under state law to libraries, fire districts, assessor, treasurer, all those folks. And we just added a couple. We only have to do that electronically, so it doesn't take a lot of time in order to do that, to send that notice out. And we just did it so it ended on a Monday, hence the 63 days. As part of that draft ordinance, you'll recall we've had a lot of discussion related to Employment Center, and there will be a moratorium that ordinance would also put into effect upon the annexation and after that 63 days. So any of those properties, and represented roughly here, that the northern portion of that is the Employment Center property that will have initially a 6-month moratorium on it while we work through the Berger-ABAM process, the Northwest Urban Growth Area Land Study, the Urban Growth Area Study, not just the Northwest, as we work through that. And one of the deliverables from that is the Employment Center regulation. So as I mentioned, the recommended action is to set a public hearing for November 16th at 7 p.m. to receive public testimony on the proposed Northwest UGA annexation as part of the consent agenda.
Questions? Michelle?
Yeah, the only question I had when I was reading that was, so we have the 6 months and then the 63 days, which is about 8 months. Is that enough time for the study we're doing? What happens at the end of that 8 months? Are we required then to...
We can, and it's actually, the 63 days is, the 6 months doesn't start until that 63 days is
Right.
up. So we go 63 days, annexation becomes effective, but that's when the moratorium starts. That's the 6-month moratorium. My hope is that that early on within that 6-month time frame, we will at least have the information back related to employment from Berger, and we'll be able to come back in front of you and then have that discussion about next steps. What do we want to do? Are we going to move things around? It may take longer than the 6 months, and if that's the case, then we will be back when the state law requires us to come back with a work plan. We're going to extend it out further than that. I'm sure that that's part of the thing that we'll be working with Berger on, is having that work plan, putting that together about the next steps forward.
So we can extend the moratorium then at the end of that 6
Yes, we
months?
can.
Okay, thank you.
When does it become part of our total assessed value?
It's actually going to work out to be February 1.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't receive any of the taxes on that for a full year after that, correct?
It's, yes, I believe that I'd have to look on that. There's some timeframes in there about when, once it's annexed, and I don't know all of that off the top of my head, but I will find that out. But I believe it waits until
Used to be the county still got it for that year. of
that year,
transition.
yes.
So it would effectively, we would effectively begin to collect taxes at the beginning of 17?
Yeah,
Some point in 17.
yeah, I could, so I don't want to misspeak.
Right.
I'd be more than happy to look that up, and I could email out that
Perfect, thank
to
you.
everybody and
That'd be great.
and have that ready on the 16th. But there's a lot of dates, and to say it's confusing is probably an understatement. But at one point I thought I had it down, but I'll get that information for you.
Great, thank you.
Other questions for Mitch? More to come on the 16th.
Yes,
See on the item on consent for this evening.
yes.
Jeanette, you've got some resolutions for us on personnel policies.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Council. So before you, next Monday night will be the resolution in your Dropbox. And this is a follow-on from the presentation, for the most part, that I did last Monday evening. So the resolution has 3 parts to it. The 2 parts include the class comp study and a proposed 1.3% COLA increase. And the third component is a new piece that obviously was not part of the presentation last Monday night. But for consistency purposes, what we'd like to do is for the non-exempt, non-represented employees, similar to the AFSCME contract, is to provide 4 floating holidays, the 4th floating holiday being provided after 5 full years of service, and that's consistent with our 307 contract. So just to walk you through the document, the exhibits, Exhibit 1, in terms of the positions or classifications covered by the non-represented portion of our personnel policies. So you'll see here cleanup, where positions no longer exist, and you see new positions coming in, some of which are part of the Public Works reorganization, as well as the accounting supervisor. And then continuing on with 2A, just some cleanup there in terms of the different buckets that I call. We've got the city administrative department heads, managers and supervisors, because we're eliminating that NU4 and NU5 classifications, and then the non-exempt section. The Exhibit A, this is the range schedule, if you will, that governs the non-represented employees. So that is representative of the different classifications. This includes the classification study, the compensation analysis that I provided to you last Monday night, as well as the 1.3% proposed COLA for 2016. And then Exhibit A, this is just the additional floating holiday for the non-exempt, non-represented employees. We just have one of those currently, to align with the AFSCME contract, with the 4 floating holidays after 5 years.
We're moving right through stuff.
All right, thank you.
Jeanette. Good evening.
Before, excuse me, before we just open it up for general budget questions, we've put together a presentation on the property tax levy with information on the IPD, implicit price deflator, and versus CPI and some of those things. So our agenda is we're going to kind of do a refresher on the 2015 tax bill, talk about the IPD, our history, and then show what 2016 would look like under the full 1%, and then also under the 0.251%, and then just provide information on what we would require for doing a substantial need resolution or to bank that capacity for the future. So it's kind of a refresher. Based on I-747, we can only increase our property taxes 1%, and then it's also capped out at the $3.10. So as long as we have capacity within the 310, we can raise it 1% or the IPD, whichever is less. And as you know, we've had a conversation that the 2015, which implies for, or doesn't imply, which impacts, that's the word, 2016 is the 2.51%. So for 2015, we took our total levy amount, divided it by our AV to get the levy rate that gets applied to the value of individuals' properties. So for instance, our levy amount was $4.02 million last year. When you divide it by the AV, which shouldn't have a dollar sign there, to get to the 2.75841 per thousand. Zillow says that our median price range on Hallam and Washougal is $280,000. So when you times the rate by the assessed value of the individual parcel, you get their tax bill at $772.36. And that's just the city's portion of their tax bill, so it's just a portion. There's also schools and those other levies that are on their total tax bill. But for the city of Washougal, that's the portion that they would pay for the overall levy of $4 million for 2015.
But they're limited by I-747 too, aren't they? School districts and the, or do you know?
I don't
Unless
know.
there's other voted debt or their
Technology levy.
they have multiple buckets, school districts. And a key point on this slide is it's illustrative of how, we got our rate. But the council doesn't set a levy rate. The council sets a levy amount, and then the rate gets back calculated from that. So this is just a refresher. You all knew that, but and you've done that multiple times. But just a refresher for everybody that we're talking about setting the levy amount, and then the rate calculates afterwards.
We did a little bit of research to determine the difference between the implicit price deflator and the consumer price index. And basically, the IPD is an index by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and it's reflecting the prices of personal consumption expenditures for all currently produced goods and services wherever produced in the United States, versus the consumer price index that's usually regional based. And it's an index reflecting the prices of a fixed representative basket of goods and services purchased by urban consumers. And just as a reminder, we use the Portland, Vancouver, Salem regional data.
So the IPD is a national rate, and there's no difference across, so it would be the same in North Dakota as it would be here? Okay.
I don't know if there are subsets of the IPD, but the statutorily required IPD is this.
I'm sorry, say that again?
The statutorily required IPD is what's here. I'm not sure if, like the CPI, there's different versions of it for different regions, or without fuel or without food. And one key distinction here that I thought was interesting is that year over year, the IPD might measure different commodities. It looks at currently produced goods and services back to a base year. The CPI is a fixed basket of goods and services. So the goods and services can fluctuate in an IPD. That's the extent of our statistical information about these. They're different indices. We typically use the CPI, as you know, in our labor conversations. Social Security looks at it for what it's doing at a more national level. It's very contextual for that. For whatever reason, the legislature used the IPD.
The next few slides are kind of just historical information on where our levy rates have been, what our levy amounts have been, and then comparing it to the IPD, the CPI, and then our rate. So it's just kind of a dump of information for your knowledge base. I went back to 2002. The 747 was passed, I believe, November of 2001, so it started in 2002. You can see throughout the years we've hovered around the 2.8 mark, and then we dropped in 2008 down to 2.36. We had a levy lid lift going that started from 2007 to 12, so that impacts those rate amounts. Those are inclusive of that levy lid lift of the 10 cents. You can see we were capped out at the 310 in 11, 12, and 13. 14, we were able to recapture some of the banking that we had done in those years because we adopted a resolution for the full 1% in 11, 12, and 13, which allowed for the banking. And then 15 includes the new levy lid lift. There's kind of a lot of information for you. The corresponding, I tried to get these on one graph and it didn't work well, so we went to two. But these are the corresponding levy amounts that were passed since 2002. And you can see that for 15, we're about where we were at the peak in 2009 from a dollar perspective.
So here, this is illustrative of that fraction, right? The levy is the levy amount sets the rate. You don't set the rate. So the tax rate was going down in all the years where the levy was going up, and that's because of spikes in our assessed valuation. So when you look at this is the amount of money that we received for our general tax levy. And you can see, starting in about 2005, dramatic growth in the community in assessed valuation. So that was a combination of market appreciation as well as new construction, and primarily new construction because you were capped at that 1% plus new construction. So dramatic growth in the community, and those of you that were here saw that dramatic growth, and that's why the levy went to where it did. But then you can see the Great Recession hit, and assessed values went down, the rate went up, and we had to do with less, and that's where you can see, and I kind of did this in my head, the cumulative loss in general tax revenues from the property tax starting in about 2009, about $1.5 million over that period of time. And that's what, when Sean became mayor and I came as the city administrator, that's what we were dealing with, is trying to make sure we had balanced budgets during all of that time, and the frugality that we had to deploy and some of the things we had to defer in order to have balanced budgets during that time. But it's interesting for historical perspective. Basically, it's within $10,000 of each other. The total amount of general property taxes that we received to provide services, general services in this community in 2009 is basically what we are receiving this year. So this is current 15, is
Correct.
the current 15. So that's very interesting. We are doing what we did in 2009 with basically the same amount of property tax revenue.
So this chart combines CPI, the IPD, and our levy history. You can see that the dark blue stays about at the 1%, other than in '09 when the council voted to, I believe, do a negative 1% rate. The table on the next page shows it a little bit better. You can see the numbers. Putting all the numbers on the graph didn't work well. So this basically shows what CPI was in our region for the first half compared to what the IPD was for that year. The council action, we've always set, other than in '09, the 1%, even if we couldn't capture it all. And then the difference there in the far side to show. And then we threw, it's off year, so it's 2002 sets the rate for 3. The numbers on 3 set it for 4. So the number down at the very bottom, the 15, is what we're currently dealing with, the IPD of 251. And we just put the council action at 1 because that's what the mayor's proposed budget has included in it, just for perspective to compare.
A couple of council members asked to see this historically, to see basically what the impact of legislative implementation of I-747 has been on communities. The IPD over the years, as you can see, particularly in the boom, in the middle part of last decade, 2, 3, 4, 4.5%, but you were capped at 1%. So our purchasing power was dropping by those percentages, but the legislature only gave us the 1% to deal with that, and that's the dilemma of the 1% cap. All but in 2009, where basically the council's -1 mimicked the minus 0.85. But every other year, basically, we've been losing ground to the IPD, and then definitely as well losing ground to the CPI. Now again, this year, numbers informing for next year, we once again see an IPD that's less than 1%. But taken in totality and put in perspective, your actions have lagged the IPD for quite some time, and it's pretty typical. It basically lags the IPD. We didn't accumulate what that difference is here, but as you can imagine, that accumulates and is a cumulative impact.
So that brings us to the 2016 projections. So I broke it out between the general fund 1% levy based on our highest lawful times the 1% to get an amount of $40,000. Also did the same calculation with the IPD of 251, and then also with the EMS levy, the same 1% and the 0.251% to show the differences between what passing the substantial need resolution and then, or just going with the IPD, to show you the delta there. Then we calculated it out across the remaining levy lid lift. It goes through 2020. And after the initial year, I assumed that the IPD would be over 1% for this calculation, just to show a cumulative difference, not knowing what the IPD would really do. That gave us kind of a baseline analysis to show the differences or the loss to the community over the remaining life of the levy lid lift. You can see in the general fund over the life, it's about $154,000, and for the EMS levy, it's about $25,000 cumulatively.
We wanted to show this just so the council understands all the implications of the decision that you'll need to make with respect to what levy that amount you want to pass. When you look at just 2016, it's $30,000 out of our total budget. However, that $30,000 stays, and then the next year, and unless there's a banking recapture, this does not assume any banking recapture. This just assumes that we do that one time, and then we're at 1% from there on, and then basically after 5 years, it's $154,000 hit to the general fund. And then that would be ongoing again, unless, of course, there was banking that was done. On the EMS side, much smaller amount, of course, but the EMS levy is a relatively small levy compared to our total levy. This is money we use exclusively in our contract with the city of Camas.
And then going back to how does this relate to a property worth $280,000? I only did this for the general fund. I didn't do it for the EMS levy. With the full 1%, it comes with equates to a rate of 2.63614. The 1.5 AB there is an estimate that I've gotten from the assessor's office. It does not have. It's using current year state utility information because they don't have that available yet, but it does factor in new construction. So chances are it'll be a little bit higher than that number, but just to have an estimate for budgeting purposes, I was able to get that from the assessor's office. And so if you take that rate times the $280,000 home, you get an annual tax bill of $738.12. Using the 0.251%, you get a rate of 2.61659, or an annual tax bill of $732.65. So just to give you a perspective between the two for an average priced home.
It seems to me there would be more of a discrepancy in the 1% as the,
Well, it's $30,000 across a total levy of almost $4.1 million. So per $1,000 of AV, it's not a lot of money. I mean, and I think that's partly why the council wanted to talk about doing the IPD, because it's $30,000. Of course, it accumulates.
Did I misunderstand? I thought we were limited to the IPD.
No, you can, without a resolution, an additional resolution of substantial need, the statute provides that you can take 1% if you pass a resolution of substantial need. And so we're walking through that. In fact, that's what this slide is for, is basically the mayor's summary concepts of what he'd be proposing in a resolution of substantial need at the hearing.
Does the banking resolution, you need to do a resolution for banking as well?
That's
Does
correct.
that also require a substantial need?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the next slide.
So these findings, if you would, if you look at, and we have both levies here because you have to act on both levies. So when you look at the general and street, which is our bigger levy, we just put in three things, which are the three most prominent things that we've talked about. Per your direction, we want to maintain and enhance our pavement condition index. That required us to come up with $140,000 additional dollars this year. Now, thankfully, the real estate market has improved, and so we were able to find 100 of that $140,000 out of real estate excise tax revenues. So that's good news for the general fund. However, we added another $40,000 out of the general fund to make that $500,000 street maintenance target that you prescribed for us.
So if everything remained the same, we would be 40,000 short without this.
30, right. So that just puts, that, again, there's lots of different things in the budget. This is one item that was a priority and is a substantial need in the communities. We've got to keep ours, we should keep our pavement condition index at a good place. This next year, as you know, in the budget, we are having the professional that does those assessments for just about every community around do that again to see where we're at, and then we'll have new numbers for what we'll need to do in 16 and 17. Anticipate that those will be more than $500,000 as we move forward. I don't know exactly what it will be, but to keep our the price of maintaining our streets will continue to just incrementally grow due to inflationary pressures and age and deterioration. Another community need that all of us have been identifying for a number of years is that additional police officer. We were able to do that in this budget. That's fully generally funded. That's $100-ish thousand. That's in the general fund. And then we've talked about deferred maintenance in our facilities and parks, and you see some one-time expenditures that we're doing that were proposed in the budget for a number of different things at the parks that are basically maintenance type items. We will be getting our facilities, our capital plan, basically a good document for all of our facilities over the next several months so that we know other maintenance that we need to do in a more programmatic way in all of our facilities instead of kind of a more ad hoc approach that we've been using. We'd like to be more programmatic with that. On the EMS levy side, it's a much smaller levy, of course, but it's an important levy. It's vital to how we provide these services. As we reported several weeks ago when we were presenting the budget in our interlocal agreement with Camas, our share of the cost is a function of our population relative to Camas's, our call volume relative to Camas's, and the structure assessed valuation relative to Camas. And every year that gets recalculated because those things change, and it's weighted more toward Washougal this year. And one of the major causes of that is not necessarily population or AV, although in both of those circumstances we grew a little more quickly. If I recall, I think it was in all three factors. Mm-hmm. But the one that was most significant is our call volume. And that was reflected in the police chief's data as well. For whatever reason, we have more calls in Washougal than there are in Camas. They're a bigger community by 1.5, but we have more fire and EMS calls than they do. So high demand for those services. That would be our finding of substantial need on the EMS levy is our costs are going up because of customer demand, and therefore.
They just reported a larger than we expected increase, right?
And then, yes, just last week, we were informed that the 2016 budget number that they adopted last year, because they're moving into the second year of their biennial budget, it's not uncommon for there to be a halfway through a biennium adjustment. We just weren't expecting something on the order that was shared with us last week, and that's Jennifer explained our solution to that last week.
So have fire and police done studies? I remember asking a study of the police for our next public safety meeting, which we couldn't have because some folks were out of town. But has there been a study to explain to us what our call volumes, what's causing this peak?
I don't know if they.
And then how do we educate the public? You know, I mean, if they need a call, they need a call. I'm not saying we shouldn't go out.
Right.
But sometimes they're possibly not necessary. I don't know. I'm just asking what a study would show.
I don't know if the chiefs have. I'd have to ask the chiefs if their call data analysis has a flavor to it that identifies. And I want to be careful here, just like you were saying, if someone needs to call, they need to call, right? But potentially there are some calls maybe where they maybe really didn't need to call, I think is what you're getting at. So I want to be careful not to say it's a superfluous call, because exactly. For our neighbor that made the call, they needed to make the call. But I do know in the fire service, for example, that they rate their calls on a numeric scale. I'm not an expert in this, so I don't want to butcher it by saying if it's golf or baseball, and but there's ones and there's fives, and they prioritize and triage those. Some communities, in order to reduce costs, no longer respond to the very lowest priority calls. That has not been our service perspective. It's you call, we come. I can ask the chief if that's something that they've looked at, in terms of, are we going to do something different? I know that Chief Mitchell has anecdotal information about the types of calls and why he thinks that some of those are increasing in our community. I don't know that any of those calls could be considered, maybe you didn't need to call. Personal disputes that might have violence associated with them. Something small is missing.
I lost my car keys.
Something small is missing? You mean like I lost
Somebody
my car
stole
keys?
something. Somebody
Oh.
stole something from me. Fire department goes out and unlocks doors from time to time. There's other services.
Cat in the tree.
Yeah, right, so,
$25 will come from highway fuel.
right. One of the things that I hear from chiefs is you don't really know until you get there exactly what's going on. And you can, the dispatchers at Cressa do their best to triage and categorize those calls before they send them out. But until you get there, you really don't know exactly what you're dealing with. Even if you were to back off a few percentage of our police calls, we're still going to need that officer. And I think the chief would tell you we need more officers than even what we've been able to do this time. On the fire side, that's a whole different conversation.
Dave, I think we've got a pretty good idea of what Connie Joe's looking for, and we're gonna have that on the agenda for the next Public Safety Committee.
Which is gonna be January?
December.
Looks- Yeah,
I thought it
did
was
we
December.
postpone the December? Or was that,
Due
was
to a
that
lack
the
of
November?
interest.
The December has been,
Maybe it was November we canceled. What was it?
Well, it was both of them.
That's what I thought.
We
'Cause
looked at
it was at
December.
it was right at the holidays and no one was
But
available.
we're taking up committee time. We're taking
Well-
up workshop time for committee business.
I think these are good questions that, just at least an education for us on where we're at, why we're there.
So the mayor doesn't take lightly putting a proposed resolution in front of you for substantial need. Obviously, we have a statutory construct that says you're limited to the IPD unless you make a finding of substantial need. That's not something to be taken lightly. The mayor doesn't take it lightly. The council shouldn't take that lightly. The staff doesn't take that lightly. But in the context of where we're at, when you think about the fact that our total property tax levy this current year is less than what our property tax levy was in 2009, it gives some historical perspective to that. And these needs have been deferred through the Great Recession, and now we're getting back at them. And so we think that even that $30,000 difference in 1 year, which of course accumulates in over 5 years, it's $150,000, is important enough that the mayor's proposing that substantial need resolution to you, and this will be the flavor of the findings that will be articulated in that resolution. Of course, it's up to council's deliberation and ultimately vote on what you want to do with that, and Jen can explain kind of the details of that.
So the additional resolutions for the full 1% would require approval by the majority plus one to pass. Basically, there's no definition for what substantial need is. It's different for each community, so we would just tailor that to our needs that we talked about, present it to the council, and then it would need to be approved by majority plus one. If we wanted to do the banking versus actually asking for the full 1%, we would pass the same resolution, but then note in it that we were only increasing by the IPD amount, and then it would automatically bank that for the future. So that's the,
Does the banking require the majority too?
yes,
So
It
5,
just makes the difference.
correct.
so we need 5.
That's because we're getting the original amount, yeah.
Saving the ability to levy it. So you all can do that math pretty straightforward. It takes 5 affirmative votes out of the council. It's not just the majority of.
What if one of us is
residents.
missing next week?
Then it would still take 5 votes.
You could call in from Hong Kong.
I'm sure the party there would tell me to vote yes.
So the next steps are the public hearings next Monday with the possible adoption of the levies. The 16th is additional date to approve the levy rates as they must be adopted by the 30th. If we don't adopt them on the 16th, I believe there's another Monday, the 23rd-ish, that we could hold a special meeting, or any day of the week for that matter, if we don't get it done by the 16th, as they need to be approved by the 30th. Other than that.
Okay, Joe?
Would you go back to the substantial need finding, because I was taking notes. And, so the street maintenance we're short 30,000.
No, well.
Did I misunderstand? That's, I guess is what my question is. Would you go over the numbers one more time?
Sure. So the mayor's proposed budget provides $500,000 for street maintenance. And that's a target that our consultant helped us shoot for to keep our pavement condition index where we wanted it to be. Last year, we were at $360,000, so we needed $140,000 more to make that happen. 100,000 of that 140 we found from real estate excise taxes. So
And we anticipate that for next year.
yes, that's Jen's revenue projection for real estate excise tax for next year. And as you know, we use that both quarters of the real estate excise tax for a couple of different things. One predominantly is debt service on the downtown improvements. We have a number of years left, significant debt still to pay off, and so she believes that we can take more REIT money toward street maintenance and still make our debt service. So then we needed $40,000, so we added $40,000 to street maintenance in the general fund. That's an increased expense. So the general fund hit there was $40,000. An additional police officer is roughly $100,000. It's plus or minus, I can't remember the exact number. That's a brand new expenditure this year. And then in facilities and parks, you saw in some of Trevor's presentations a number of projects that we're doing that are related to maintenance in facilities and parks. Some of that we're using our building capital facilities fund for, but that came from the general fund, and we support that fund out of the general fund.
Do you have a dollar figure on that?
I'd have to add up all the little ones. I would say for all of those projects, a couple $100,000 maybe. Because it's found in multiple places in the
Yeah.
budget. It's in multiple places, but it's,
The one to the transportation capital is actually the 204 fund closeout. That's, we don't have additional, but there was, I think, $10,000 for cemetery software. There was $10,000 for tree mitigation in the parks budget, but it's kind of just scattered throughout the various funds in the general fund. Those are two that I can think of off the top of my head.
And then
20,000
there's-
for pickleball fence, 20,000 for
Pickleball
fencing in the
fence.
police department.
police.
I don't remember how much the
60.
fascia was on the.
100 for the fascia
100,
facade.
And then that road down to Lower Hathaway.
right.
Mm-hmm.
That was
125-ish.
for the whole project. Yeah. So it's a couple $100,000, maybe even $300,000 is all we can do this year. We've got much more than that to do in deferred maintenance. And I have some concern about what this pavement condition index report's gonna look like when we get it in 2016, and what it's gonna say we need to do in 16, 17, 18, 19, moving forward. And we'll have some decisions to make there around street maintenance coming up. But until we have that, we don't have that data.
Well, the 40,000 additional funds for the pavement management program to get it to 500 is on top of the 210. So the 500,000 is split between REIT and the general fund at 250 each. So we're not spending just 40,000, it's the full 250,000 from the general fund is what we've been able to program.
And we did that all in the last 2 years, right?
You could call that substantial.
Yes, definitely. That's why it's on the list.
Right. As Jen mentioned, there's no statutory definition of substantial need, and there's no WAC provisions that provide any definition, and we're not aware of any common law where somebody has challenged a resolution of substantial need and a court has defined it. So there is just simply no guidance for that. Every community is unique. And I would say that the definition of substantial need is what the council says substantial need is, and is that
It would be certainly upheld, whatever we decided.
whatever you
Sorry,
decide.
I couldn't hear
It
you.
would certainly be upheld, whatever we decided.
Paul?
Minor thing, but to go back to the definition of implicit price deflator, I read it and I said, that's not right, and then I had to go back and check and make sure I had it right. The implicit price deflator, and it's gross domestic product implicit price deflator, is an index reflecting the change in prices of all currently produced goods and services wherever produced in the United States. It's not consumer, it's all. So that includes investment, government expenditures, and exports.
Yeah, I struggled with that, Councilman, because in the statute, it uses the adjective personal. I'd have to pull up the statute. Then I looked at some other places where there were definitions.
I went to BEA and said, that's their definition.
Right, so it's very interesting, and perhaps the statute, is erroneously has that adjective in there about that. So I tossed it in there because I saw it in the statute, but thanks for the clarification. I haven't really studied the IPD. We just researched it.
Macro 101, gross domestic product is consumption plus investment plus government plus exports.
Michelle?
On the banking additional capacity, is that the difference between the 1% and the .251, so .749?
Correct.
Correct.
You're basically able to take that a year later,
You're reserving the right to take it at some point in the future.
how far into the future?
I don't think there is any amount of time.
And could that potentially be in addition to another 1%?
That's correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
You could you need to do the substantial need resolutions again in order to take that in the future over the 1%.
And you could do that for both the EMS and,
Correct.
Right. Often councils will bank capacity when there's some problem with the rate. I've never seen it. That doesn't mean it wouldn't happen. I've never seen it in this context where you're banking when you have the rate capacity. If you think that you want that levy amount, typically I've seen it taken right in real time as opposed to bank. Where banking's been contextual here is when we were capped at our rate. We were not able to get the full levy amount that we could because assessed valuation had declined so precipitously. We were capped at 310. And so we didn't want to be behind when we came out of the Great Recession. So I think the council wisely banked that levy capacity. However, in that first year when it was available to you in 2014, because of a lot of other calculus that gets very complex because of the levy lid lift expiring and all of that, we weren't able to really get everything that had been banked, but you took everything that you could in 2014.
Is there any available now?
Lost the
It's
rest.
gone. It was lost.
Why was it lost?
We need Paul Lewis.
I would apparently, we're the only community in the state that it ever happened to because of a perfect storm of declining, significantly declining assessed valuation and an expiring lift all at the same time. And it had not happened that way to anyone before, and so we asked Paul Lewis to look at that. He had to ask the Department of Revenue and a couple of others, and then ultimately the assessor figured that out for us. That information was provided to the council, so we can go back and find, I think, a very articulate representation of that. I just don't want to do a disservice to that explanation and try to recall it off the top, but it was
evaporated.
It was a weird.
Yeah, I remember it being discussed. I never really knew why, though. I remember that we lost it, but I don't know. I guess it was that quirky.
Right. And that's the conceptual explanation, the math,
Well, don't even go there.
yeah, there's math
That's why,
behind that.
that's why I didn't get a PhD in economics, went to law school instead.
Connie Jo?
So on this page, about the calculating the tax bill for 2016, do you have 2015 in this page, in this?
Yes,
And I
it's
missed
the
it.
second slide, I think.
Second
The
slide shows where
third
we are
slide,
now.
maybe.
Haha. Thank you.
Now, if you look at your tax bill, you're not gonna see those numbers. Well, I guess you can if you look at the detail, because this is one of
Well,
a
yeah,
list
like you
about
said,
that.
other people get a piece of us.
Right, and this is not the biggest one.
Uh-huh.
This is also not the smallest one, so.
Schools.
Schools, yeah. Educating our kids is costly,
Very important.
but it's important, yeah.
Other thoughts, other comments, other questions? Brent?
You know, I'm gonna, if you could have this vote next week, I may have the pleasure of missing it, but,
We may
here's,
hold it over to the 16th for you.
yeah, well. And, it'll be, see, at 7, it'll be early in the morning there the next day. I'll tell you what you did. I've already made that
Back to
joke.
the future, yeah.
But here's where I am at it, with it. And I appreciate the mayor sending out an email on it, and I considered that. I think the way I'd like to do it is I'd like to bifurcate the decision. And by bifurcating it, I mean, I could make the finding of substantial need generally for our future years going forward when we have an IPD that goes up above 1% and our expenses go up above 1%. But this year we don't have it. And so I could support a levy, increasing the levy, the IPD rate of 2.251% and banking the difference, looking at our long-term secular, that's another economics term, secular movement of the gap between our expenditures and our revenue, and banking it for use when the IPD is higher, and it will be. So I could do that.
We don't have an IPD of 1% or more, but we certainly have the expenses more than 1%.
Sure.
What was that word? I gotta look that one up.
Secular?
No.
Bifurcate.
Bifurcate.
Divide it.
Split into two.
Never heard that one.
Well, talk it all, anyway.
It's a good tool in the legal profession.
Yeah, that's right. Bifurcate the
Jennifer?
trial.
I concur with Brent on the bifurcation. But I do think we have a substantial need in the EMS.
I was gonna say that too. I agree with
And
that.
I would like to take a look at the resolution you're proposing for, particularly for the EMS levy. See if that's something I would agree with, but I'm happy that things are looking up financially for the city. And I see that reflected in the budget. I see that reflected in being able to do more projects, and our economy is definitely looking up. So I just don't think we can justify that substantial need at this time. I know you're worried about the street maintenance. I definitely would support keeping an additional police officer. I would say that, if we need to look for $30,000 to come out of the budget, we can't get the 1% approved. I would say look to street maintenance more than anything.
You mean eliminate it from that?
Correct.
I do hope that we at least bank the capacity. There's a great temptation when times are looking good to forget that the economy is cyclical. And on the basis of how long recoveries have lasted in the past, we should reasonably expect to see something of a recession in 2.5 to 4 years. So let's keep in mind that times are good now, but that's not forever.
Michelle?
I like the idea of banking, especially in regards to what you said about the pavement condition, that if things really turn out to be very negative, so forth, that it sounds like it could be brought back to approve that additional amount if we so desired, if that, the forecast was really bad as far as the pavement was concerned.
It would be at a future, just to clarify, it wouldn't be something we could do at any point throughout the year. It would be at the next November,
Oh, okay, okay.
when we set the next levy.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I thought it could be done anytime.
Mm-mm.
Yeah,
It
okay.
would be at the next.
You could
Done it in
enhance,
a year, but as part of the ad valorem taxes.
right, you could
Okay.
increase expenditures going into reserves anytime if something like that came up. But
Yeah.
we would try to keep it on an annual cycle for that program. And I should just add here, because if we do not take the full 1% in the general fund, what we would propose and what we had talked about proposing would not be to cut anything that's proposed in the budget, but we would tap Fund 125, an additional $30,000. That's what we would propose. As you recall, Fund 125 can be used exclusively for fire and emergency medical services. We can transfer, we in fact could transfer the entire $600 and something thousand from that fund to the general fund this year, and then have $600,000 more dollars to spend. However, our approach has been, I believe with your concurrence, that we should only tap that fund if we absolutely have to do that.
Once it's gone, it's gone.
Because once it's gone, it's gone. It's
Well,
one-time money. And potentially this very slow rate of an IPD is kind of a one-time thing. As you look historically, it really doesn't happen like this, and so we think it would be appropriate for you to do that. Last week, Jen explained that that was how we were going to deal. We were proposing to deal with the new information from Camus regarding our payment to them. We were not proposing to use Fund 125 at all. We are now proposing to use some of that to solve that problem. That's what we would propose if that's the direction that the council goes on this and does banking instead. Of course, it's up to you. We could prioritize and trim 30,000 from other places in the budget, but we think everything that's in there is meeting your priorities and is essential, to keep the community moving forward.
That's fine. Joyce?
Well, I'm inclined to go for the 1%. I think we're just coming off of some tight years, and there are many projections and needs in the budget. I've been going over the budget, and I think we should back it up at this point while we can. We don't know how long good times last, and so I'm inclined for the 1%.
Michelle?
The $280,000 for the EMS, do you have a figure for that approximately? For that $280,000 house, how much that EMS, dollar-wise, or what the rate would be?
It's $1 or $2 probably, right?
Yeah, it's not.
So it's pennies on the dollars, the difference
Yes.
between the, doing the 1% or the 0.25?
Right,
Okay.
that's right.
Joe?
Sometimes I feel silly asking certain questions, but I ask them anyways. So I'm looking at 2015 for what we are currently paying on a house of $280,000, and it's $772.36.
Right,
And we're looking for 2016 to decrease that.
that's right.
That's good. Did that come out and I just slept through it? I mean, when you said the numbers, I just wanted to circle them, and the 1% is 738. We're paying 772 right now on page 2. Page 6 shows we would only be paying 738 with the 1% and 732 with the
1/4%.
That was the other way around.
No,
right here.
remember,
Valuation's going up nicely.
you don't set the rate, you
Right.
set the
Right.
levy amount. So if the levy amount, if you think about this, if the levy amount only goes up by 1/4 point, That's a very small increase in the total amount of money we can get in. But now you have to divide that by an increased assessed valuation. So for a $280,000 home, it's going to have a tax rate that's lower. And so it will pay less. Now, in fairness to that calculation, what we did not do is we did not increase the 2015 $280,000 home to some, like 289 or 293.
Because it's assessed value.
Because it's assessed value. But it will not eat up all of that difference. So yes, it's very interesting. Now, we need to be very careful because, again, we're only one small part of this.
Right.
But theoretically, what will happen, and this will happen anytime that you see a pretty sizably increasing assessed valuation. The tax rate goes down. That's on some of those other charts. And what an individual home will pay to the city will go down. However, there'll be more homes paying.
Right.
And so you get that little 0.25%. I'll explain that to myself or to my wife or to a neighbor, and they say, no, my bill is higher. You're always getting more taxes. And I'll say, well, how'd you vote on the school district's capital bond? That's a significant, how did you vote on the M&O or the lid lift? Or, the port has some too, the state gets some.
Library.
The library, the county,
Yeah.
so
And they assume it's all the city, it's all lumped in.
we're all lumped in together. And you know what? At the end of the day, we're all partners in government. I guess at some level, somebody needs to look
Tax.
at that bottom line, and we should all be sensitive to that.
But
Our
we're
mission
only
here is to
responsible for
deliver our
this one.
services, right? So we're just giving you all that information. But yes, that's Counselor, that's an excellent observation. These are, in fact, Jen believes that those numbers might even be a little smaller for that house because it's not including some additional assessed value that the state always drops on us late.
So we don't have to put in the
So-
calculations.
I feel silly asking because it seems so obvious it's going down. Am I missing something?
It does go down a lot. but-
No, but it definitely goes down.
And that's why sometimes your neighbors will come in and
$40.
they get their proposed
Most of that
valuations, all
37.
that type of stuff early in the year and go, I'm gonna get killed come next year's tax times, I'm gonna get killed. And the answer is, no, you shouldn't. You shouldn't at all. As long as that happened throughout the community, and they now do them community by community, it's pretty even up, so.
Well, that's why the proposal of the county to cut property taxes is like $4 or something like that, is what you're saying? And-
Yeah, they're looking at cutting 2%.
Yeah, but I wanted to point out, I did a little research into this on banking. And they actually put in the reason why they provide for banking in the state statute, RCW 8455.092. They say the purpose of this section is to remove the incentive for a taxing district, which include a city, to maintain its tax level at the maximum level permitted under this chapter, and to protect the future levy capacity of a taxing district that reduces its tax levy below that level that it otherwise could impose under this chapter by removing the adverse consequences to future levy capacities resulting from such levy reductions. Well, that's exactly what we're doing here. We're trying to reserve, we don't really critically have a need for it this year. I don't think. Right? But I can see that we critically will have a need for it in the future. And so that's why I'm willing to do that, and I think it fits within the intent of that statute.
So it's 90 cents.
For that $280,000 house?
Right, the difference between the two would be basically $1.
Okay. Thank you.
I just want to observe for Connie, Joe, and everyone that having tried to explain the difference between a levy and a rate to people for at least the past 8 years, it is extraordinarily opaque. It's very hard to explain. The tax assessor's office actually has a 2-page, 4-side handout that does a decent job of explaining it. It's particularly difficult because people who came here from Oregon have a very different system, and they assume that Washington is just like Oregon. Oregon, everything is based on a rate. Washington, everything's based on an amount. And As I said, the tax assessor's office has a two-page, four-side thing that does a pretty good job of explaining what the implications are.
I've read that, it's pretty helpful, right on Peter's website.
Well, I'll also add that when I got into municipal law up here, I picked up the MRSC revenue guide for cities, and it made some comment in there about Washington's property tax laws are the most complex in the country. And so that's why we have this problem. And I think somehow we need to fix that at some point, but that's not our job, that's the legislature's job.
Well, one of the things, interesting you say that, one of the committees that I've sat on now for 3 years, at least 3 years with AWC is, it's now called the Fiscal Sustainability Committee. And there's roughly 30 people, I think, total on there, including finance directors, council members, mayors, some of our lobbyists, different folks in there. And we just had a meeting this last Thursday, really getting ready to probably take off on at least 2 years, if not longer, of more in-depth discussions with key members of the legislature of, is there some way for us to begin changing what our revenue models are, so that we don't run into what we did in 9, 10, 11 again. And, you know, back to not only the days when 747 and 695 were passed, but even, you know, clear back to the late 50s, early 60s when 35A was put in place. Things have, the world has changed, and our revenue sources have changed, and, you know, things that influence them. One of the things that was mentioned up there, though, by a couple different folks, including, Finance Director in Redmond, Mike Bailey, was that they're, in the lobbyist for AWC said that they're hearing it often in Olympia, the impression among our members of the State House is that cities and counties are swimming in money. The economy is fixed, we're swimming in money. And it didn't help that the night before, so Wednesday night in Seattle, the Sound Cities had their meeting, their regional meeting of all their cities, and they did their city champions awards for those members of the legislature there, and they had 4 of them there that night. And as they went around, as some of you saw here in Vancouver, as they went around and talked about their communities and stuff, they said the staff was just kind of going, oh, this isn't gonna go well for us, because that same conversation was happening. Gosh, you know, now the economy's returned, we're doing things, so the impression to folks is getting to be, we've helped the cities out a lot this last year. We didn't prior to this, but we did this last year in the legislature. So 16 and 17, maybe not so much having to focus on those rather than keep the train going and trying to get some of those monies back. So obviously one of those things that any legislator can look at and pull the information on are things like these. You know, and that old question still comes up that we talk about often of, you know, we've given you these different tools, how many of those have you availed yourself of? Oh, only 1 or 2, but you still have 7 or 8 or 9 that you haven't availed. Gosh, you didn't even take your full 1% last year. What do you mean you need more money from the state? You must have enough money. So there's a little bit of that in there as well, and so they're actually taking that information from some of the legislators that they talked to, that after they had some further discussions, they're kind of like, huh, it'd probably be good for you all as an association and as cities on a whole to craft a message to make sure that you kind of combat that if you're not swimming in money. So that, as of Thursday, that started a whole nother conversation with that group as well.
On that, I was actually thinking about this resolution. I think maybe we ought to talk about that a little bit, that this is a unique year because the IPD came in so low and some of our council members weren't able to get there, but certainly this is a critical issue for the future.
Right.
And we ought to present that. Maybe we need a separate resolution on that, and the legislature needs, I always thought 747 was kind of not the greatest thought out public policy. I guess. to
Which
put it.
one
Oh,
is
that's-
747? I don't know it by number. What is
1%
that?
is-
That's the one, that's basically
The
this.
1%?
That's basically this.
1%, which
What
is
happened
an
was
arbitrary
the
number.
state Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional. The legislature turned around and enacted it, basically is what happened. And, but it's just not good, well thought out policy, and it needs to, something needs to be done with it, because you just see our expenses going like this. We're getting by this year, but, you know.
Well, even if they're only 2%, you still got, it's still widening.
Right,
Even if our expenses were only 2% higher,
right,
we
right.
still miss it. At the end of every month, all of our checkbooks would be in the red.
And if you were to take an inflation measure that makes sense for the city, it would be the producer price index, which includes cost of labor, concrete, steel, things like that, things that are used to produce, as opposed to consumer price index, which is groceries and rent and, but
You know, it's-
getting there is.
It's tricky. I mean, this is major tax policy change at the state level, significant, and that's a heavy lift for any
Oh,
state
yeah.
legislature. There's gonna be lots of different, and the voters approved I-747, so that adds another twist to that, which should be respected to some
Well-
extent, right?
Well, that's what they did when the legislature turned around and went ahead and imposed it anyway. Explain, we'll
What-
just make it state law.
What helps us get by is the new construction aspect of it. And I think what they need to factor that in some kind of way, so that, because that's, when I've talked to a certain legislator around here about that, that legislator always said, well, you always get your money from the new construction. Well, not in 2009 and 2010, we didn't.
Yep.
And,
Or 11.
or 11,
That's right.
or 12, really, for that matter.
It's just now
And
coming back.
it lags anyway.
Right, so I think maybe if you back that out and you know, come up with maybe, we're not in the legislature here and probably talking about this too much, but you back out the new construction, and basically we can do the inflation rate excluding new construction, some kind of formula they can come up with to take that out, because that creates distortions.
Well, when you look at how we're funded, I'm sorry.
You can bifurcate it.
Yeah, bifurcated.
If you look at how the state has equipped city councils of our type to provide general purpose government to our citizens, we're motivated to do certain things. Growth, so we can get new construction. Now, you want to be smart and you want to try to get the type of new construction that doesn't demand a lot of services. Non-residential is ideal, but we need places for ourselves and our kids too. And sales tax. But we want to have jobs for everybody, but really what brings the revenue so that we can provide protection, public safety and fire and EMS and maintain our streets is sales tax. So we're motivated to find that. And then, you know, business and occupation tax is kind of a non-starter in Southwest Washington for a lot of good reasons. That's one of the four legs of a stool that they've given us. That one's kind of off the table, if you would. The other one's the utility tax, and we use that here. Those are the only tools that we have. Oh, there's a TBD over here, and there's a couple of other little things, but they direct more than tax policy. When that's the way that we can provide services, that shapes our communities, because we have to provide services, we have to be able to get the revenue to do it, so that's why we do those things. And one last comment, it's very interesting. Over the last 5 or 6 years, because of the Great Recession, we've been constrained from doing a lot of things which would normally have been considered kind of routine things to do. Now we're getting to do those things, and it's very exciting and it's very positive for us, right? Yes, we're going to do these things. So I think all of us that are close to this like to celebrate that when we're at these meetings. But one thing to keep in mind is, if you look at the portfolio of things that we're doing, in 2016 relative to 15, 14, 13, it looks just dramatic, like, oh my goodness, look at everything we're doing, and it is. But if you compare it to things that were happening in 8 and 7 and 6, the difference isn't as dramatic. So it feels like it's such a huge difference. That's just because we're just freshly out of the Great Recession. but it's really more sort of normal for an active, growing community, what we're doing. So I'm thinking that, just based on the feedback, and I know this is informal feedback, we're in workshop, there's a number of different perspectives here. It might be wise for us to have more than one kind of resolution here. Some banking resolutions, I believe the mayor, unless he tells me otherwise, is looking at the 1%. We can have all of that available for the hearing. You can hear from your constituents at the hearing, and then ultimately motions get made and council will act.
I would say just go ahead and bring forth 3 resolutions. One for general property taxes that has a blank in there for the percentage, and we'll put it in based on the meeting and motions that are made. Another one for the EMS, I'm hearing at 1%. And then the third one for the banking that, again, is blank to be filled in if it's needed. And
Do we have to notice something specifically, or can we leave it blank?
it's all part of the public hearing process.
Yeah,
So
we've
it doesn't-
advertised the public
It's just,
hearing.
we're talking about the levy amount.
Correct.
You don't have to say exactly what, okay.
No, 'cause
Then that
council-
makes it easier.
Council can certainly change it no matter what we publicize anyway. Just modify it. Does that
Okay.
work for everybody?
Yep.
Do we care when we bring this forward?
Well, I mean, I really would like to, a chance, I will be here on the 16th unless I'm arrested by the party.
Not allowed back on the plane?
Or I decide to go to North Korea, as I've mused about on my Facebook page, but I will be here on the 16th barring something like that. And I would like a chance to hear the public input on this. And so if you're worried about, not making it by our 30th deadline, it won't be because of me.
But
I
didn't
don't think
they,
we're worried about that. We just put in a series of special meetings, and as soon as we got the one that the date worked for everybody, then we just do it anyway, so.
didn't Dave Shoemaker say he was gonna be out of town
No, it's after the 6th, well, yeah.
the
After,
day after?
I didn't write down
after
the
these
dates, like the
dates?
20th to the 28th, or 18th to the 28th, something like that.
Right,
Okay.
he's here on the 16th.
Okay. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be, but I am now. I was supposed to be in the
It's
Philippines. But it
almost
was-
as far as, just not quite as far as where I was.
It's close, right below you.
Well, just for grins, we'll go ahead and bring the budget forward on the 16th as well, and if you care to take action on the budget that night, you certainly can. It doesn't eliminate at least the first meeting in December. We've got to legally hold one meeting in December no matter what, so.
So we're putting off the,
Well, we'll have the hearings because they're noticed.
Okay.
We'll have a hearing on the budget and on both of these levies. When do you come back in town?
well, I'll actually be the night before, Sunday.
Oh, okay.
So I might be a little tired, but
We get the video up pretty quickly, so if you find some moments, while you're away, you could watch the video to hear
party doesn't censor it.
if it's not censored. And then on, the recommended actions on the 9th, we don't have to make them, recommended action could just be hold hearings. And then on the 16th, the recommended actions would be to approve the budget and the various
Yeah,
levies.
form at least.
We can do that. and
I'm fine
that's-
with that.
My apologies, that's what I was talking about, was the vote on the rates, not,
Well, if we can get the budget done too on the 16th, because we're going to have some discussion on that tonight at the regular meeting, right, on the budget?
We're
That'll be
prepared,
scheduled.
we're here just to answer questions about the budget. We knew that you had requested this kind of information on the IPs. We provided that, but we don't have any presentation on the budget, but we're prepared to answer any questions that you have right now or at the meeting.
Is Dave coming back?
yeah, he'll be back
I
seven.
I heard him, I thought I heard him say that.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that Dave Shoemaker has some amendments to the budget that he would like to propose. And I've agreed to second them so that they will be available for discussion and a vote. Therefore, what I would suggest is that we bring the budget make a motion on the budget on the 9th, bring up his motions, and then table it until the 16th. Does that work for you?
That's great. I'd like to get it all done by the 16th if we can.
I'm sorry?
I'd like to get it all done by the 16th.
It's totally up to you all and
Yeah.
our response time in regards to other information, that type of stuff.
Is there any
so.
reason we can't have that tonight? Those,
Yeah, you haven't had a public hearing yet.
that's right. Jumping the gun.
But he can basically describe what they are, so we can think about it.
That'd be good.
Oh, as far as his amendments?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
Well, quite frankly, his amendments, you could, no, that you could probably certainly deal with tonight if you cared to. I don't know if Dave's gonna be prepared to or
That's
not.
what I was-
No, he's not prepared.
But I would like to hear
Well,
the
let's ask
concepts.
Yeah, I
When he
know
returns, we'll
I know
ask
he
him.
gave them to us, written out and ready to go. And, you know, his comments were kind of, not sure that these will even get a second, and I'm probably gonna be on the 6-1 losing end of all of them anyway, but I wanna bring them up, so. And again, we appreciate that, because that goes back to, what we've done, well, I've done it for Dave every year, so that he didn't have to vote no on the budget in total, because of some minor items in there, and bring those up for individual votes, so that at least they could be heard at that point and voted on, and he felt good about being able to vote on the entire adopted budget when it's all said and done, so.
Well, I think we should just ask him.
Well, Dave sent me an email. Would there be a problem if I read this email, which was sent to me, in a public meeting? There's not a public meeting problem with that.
No, because we're in a public meeting.
He forwarded this to me. Jennifer, thanks for helping me find a way to vote for the mayor's budget without supporting the issues I find difficult to support. Having a separate vote enables me to approve the mayor's budget with good conscience after voting to oppose the following issues. 1, the tax increase. 2, a cash subsidy for the welfare programs run by it says CHC, I assume that's Children's Home Society, and already supported with significant non-cash donations from the city. 3, the Feral Cats Program. 4, 2 efforts under the strategic initiative, A, survey, $16,000, and B, downtown promotion of $9,000. 5, water bill assistance. He would like to replace those funds from whence they came. And 6, any monies to support, quote, public art, end quote. 7, Quita. So those are the ones that he would like to delete from the budget.
Can I ask an off-budget question? Speaking of Quita,
Sure.
we haven't heard from that, I'm so bad with these,
Alzheimer's?
about the group that's doing the investment.
New market tax.
New market
credit.
tax.
Yeah.
We
Have we
didn't
heard-
get it, they
Did I
didn't get,
miss that? I
they didn't
missed
get an
it.
allocation this year, they're applying.
So we didn't get anything this year,
That was kind of expected,
and they're reapplying.
Mhm.
Thank you.
right?
Like what yeah, what they say, there was only one in the entire Northwest that received anything?
I can't remember if it was Northwest or the state, but they quoted us, it takes a while to get into that, which is what they were sharing, but one of the projects is pursuing those credits through other avenues, so which is a positive thing. So we still may end up seeing a project, but because there are new market tax credits out there. CDE.
CDE.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have one of our projects that's pursuing that now as well, trying to get some unallocated tax credits from another CE that haven't issued all theirs yet, so.
Good. Thank you.
But the tool is in the toolbox, it's there, as
Okay.
opposed to not being there. So.
Okay, any items from members of the public?
Actually, Molly.
Good evening, Molly.
I'm Molly Costin, 2176 37th Street in Washougal. So actually, I just want to thank you. It was a good discussion tonight on budget issues and a lot of questions that I had that were unclear to me. And it seemed like a lot of those were clarified, so it's never easy to make a decision to raise taxes, even a tiny little amount like 1% when you consider everything. And secondly, it was good to hear from Councilmember Freeman about her concerns with escalating costs year to year to year in the fire department. I mean, I remember when we merged fire departments with some sort of an idea that it was going to save us money, and that appears not to be the case. So just interest in seeing why that is, and I don't know the story the way that you all do, but just general concern overall, but glad to see the city growing and prospering, adding a police officer, which we've needed for a long time, and having some funds to do things that we've deferred for a number of years. So thank you.
Thanks, Molly.
Can I
I
ask a
have,
question on that topic?
sure.
Is this topic gonna come up at our meeting at the JPAC?
I believe so.
That's the topic, I would believe.
Right, yeah,
November 30th.
the interlocal agreement
Fifth Monday.
requires that before the Camas Council acts on a budget, that the JPAC meet and opine. Right, but it'll just be the incremental change, because they already passed the 2016 budget, but this is an amendment to the 2016 budget that they have, not just for fire. I mean,
How much info are we gonna have in advance of that?
we can find out for you.
Be good to be able to chew on that a little bit.
Agreed. We're meeting with the staff later this week, so we'll
Okay.
bring that up.
I've got no items for you at this time. Any from council members?
I was just going to report on the JPAC meeting on November 30th. It's been said.
Okay, with that, we are adjourned, and we'll be back here at 7 o'clock for regular council meeting. Thank you.